Welcome to another MentorCore event. Today we have the pleasure of having a longtime friend Douglas Brush, uh, host of the podcast Cybersecurity Interviews, amongst many other things, joining us today, and we're going to talk a lot about giving back to your community, about being part of a community and sharing and learning from others, and helping to help us grow, helping to help you grow in return. I'm Dan Ayala. Got Lisa Beth Lentini Walker, the normal crew here, and and Doug, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. We always have good conversations. I am confident that today will be no different.
Yes.
So first of all, tell us a little bit about you and your background. How did you? What's your backstory?
Yeah, I started in the IT field. Gosh, 20. I have to do the math, but a good 25, 26 years ago, and I actually have a long history of family family members, particularly my parents, that were entrepreneurs and big on kind of fostering things when it came to business, particularly around building communities, supporting things. They were management consultants and did a lot of work in the corporate communication space, presented at a lot of events and conferences. So from a very early age, I was kind of on the road. I had the pleasure of going to England and France that my parents said was a very expensive trip, not because of the fact that we were going over there, and much of it was paid for speaking gigs they were doing. But when I got to south of France and got to experience all these things, I developed an expensive palate and assumed that everywhere you can go, you can get mussels marinara, particularly in the States. And they're like, no, that's not going to be the new norm just because we get to travel for work. So I quickly learned that. But it really kind of helped open my eyes to getting involved with a community and being part of something. So I got to see them kind of advance their business. They wrote about 6 or 7 books on corporate communications. Had a
This
lot of
explains a
things.
lot.
Yeah,
That's
I don't know why we never
amazing.
talked about this before, but and then they became teachers and they were teaching corporate communications and public speaking, group dynamics. My dad taught classes at Marist that to this day I still every now and then will get a message on Facebook or LinkedIn. My father actually passed away almost 9 years ago, but people would say, it was still one of the best classes that they ever got because he really kind of connected with them and he taught things such as the Breakfast Club as a study of group dynamics, and people that said it really resonated with them. And he wasn't big on grading and teaching. He's like felt if you got the material, you'll know it, and if you didn't, I'll know. So he was very big on kind of again building that kind of community of education. And so anyway, so about 15 years ago, I pivoted pretty hard from strictly IT consulting. This is right around 2008 in the financial crisis to to cybersecurity, which was always an interest of mine. I was heavily always following all the hackers in the 90s and cybersecurity at that point. Before we were even calling it cybersecurity, my thing with that was I didn't really want to get arrested because that's really what was happening in cybersecurity community. There was people that were out there doing it, but kind of nefariously and getting in trouble. And so following the Kevin Mitnicks and the other Kevins that were out there and watching them kind of advance this industry. So when it became more legitimized is really when I had the opportunity to kind of get more involved. And it was really right after that financial crisis when I was doing a lot of work with Merrill Lynch at the time, and all of a sudden, I was getting married in October, and right around September 15th, I sat on the couch and watched on CNBC as my major client completely disappeared off the face of the planet, and suddenly found myself having to find something new. And when we came back from the honeymoon, somebody had reached out to me and said, "Hey, look, you." Somebody who had worked on their networks for years, and he was an audio visual forensics guy. So he would go in and scrub videos and still does this to this day. Rob Sanderson, really, really good mentor that was able to say, hey, I think you have the right mindset for some of these legal implications of what we're running into with computers and computer forensics and litigation matters. Have this matter. What are you doing right now? I'm like, not a lot. I just got back from my honeymoon. I'm trying to figure out what to do, kind of want to reinvent myself. And he's like, perfect timing, and brought me involved in this matter where I did the computer investigations and later testified in federal court on it, and really found that was my calling. It was really kind of getting back to that hacker mentality and roots of ripping apart computers and understanding how they work and boiling that down into ways that were digestible to, quite frankly, a federal judge that probably doesn't know a lot about technology. So being able to discuss that and really became eye-opening, and then parlay that into other things within litigations, incident response. Got to work pretty closely with a lot of corporate folks that, quite frankly, didn't understand the technology as well, but knew they had a business impact. So help them kind of navigate these issues of cybersecurity, litigation, data privacy, security, and help them apply it to ways that improve their security programs, and kind of continued to do that in the professional consulting space for a number of years. And recently joined Splunk, which is a very large data and analytics platform, where basically take a lot of that same mentalities, kind of go in, and while we're a product company and a software company, it's to go in and understand my clients' needs on, okay, how are you using, not just our product, but any product in your cybersecurity program, and make sure that they're getting the most out of it. And so it's kind of a really cool thing where I really get to go in and kind of coach and understand people. I kind of look at it, quite frankly, as a personal, personal trainer, where an organization will bring me in and say, whether they're rehabbing from something, so it could be the analogy of an incident, or they have some kind of loftier goal of running the New York City Marathon. I'll say, let's size you up now and find those benchmarks to get you from point A to B to C and down to your goals, and really make sure that I'm there to kind of help build up to what they want to do.
Well, there was a theme in all of that, and bear with me because it's going to sound a bit like a stretch from our topic of community, but we'll get there, I promise. Is that of bridging between a technical componentry and a business componentry, and being able to be the translator, the communicator that bridges all of that. And I think that's also key toward bridging communities, the community of technologists, community of hackers, and the community of the business above. So I'd love to dive into a little bit about the value that you've seen in being able to speak both of those languages and share and bridge these communities.
Yeah, a big part of it is being that translator, quite frankly.
Well, and the other theme that I heard in there was, you come from a long line of people who were business people, but we're also teachers at heart. And that speaks, I know, to my heart, and to Dan's as well, is that part of this community concept is, how do you bring the best of your translation ability and how you connect with others into like a continual learning, continual growth, continual teaching, continual listening environment? And it sounds like you get to do that a lot in your role with Splunk right now.
I do, and that's been a big thing. Is I try to look at it from the perspective that even though I've used the word expert a lot in what I do professionally, I also feel that it comes with a certain stigma of knowing everything. But I don't subscribe to that. I think that you never know everything. And the more you know, the less you know, kind of thing. And so really by being able to be out there and kind of go in with less of an ego, and making sure that I have a lot of relationships with a lot of people in a lot of different walks of what business is, what technology is, helps me kind of hear things that I can sit down and talk to. Maybe, as an example where I've worked with organizations on their security programs, to talk to the CFO, talk to the director of IT, talk to the head of legal, talk to the head of marketing. They all kind of say different things and have their different frustrations, but you find those themes across them that organizationally you start to understand, here's the systemic problem. But you guys aren't sitting down and talking to each other. Let me kind of guide you back to that and get them in a room talking to each other, because I find that there's many more things that people have in common than that they realize. And when they talk about it, it starts breaking down some of those barriers, and you start seeing real progress. And whether that can be across many different things, socially, business-wise, it just, when people relate to each other and find a common goal, and you get them kind of paddling their canoe in the right direction all together, that's when they get that momentum.
Similarly, when we're trying to build a relationship with somebody, maybe not in direct business, but as somebody, we talk a lot about mentoring. We're focused on helping people find ways to become better mentors, to get mentored, to be a good protege. I'd love to hear a little bit about the ways you've seen people help each other in these ways, and some of the benefits that they're seeing, that you get to see when you help others uh, grow themselves.
Yeah, and that's, it's a big thing. When we kind of talked about a little bit about, the theme of this talk today was a little bit of give to get, and this idea that, kind of when you lead for first organizationally or even individually, say, okay, well, how can I help somebody else, and without, with almost like an unconditional kind of love to it, say, if I do this, it will have a little faith it'll come back, and I'm trying to always steer people towards that, because I've seen it really start to evolve. So when also I look at mentoring, I do not look at it as being very hierarchical. I think you can learn from anybody in that regard. So when you keep up those open channels of communications and you're willing to listen to a lot of different people, you'll learn lots of different things because you get those variety of perspectives. So I think for a long time, one of the things I struggled with is knowing I wanted mentors, I wanted mentorship, but thinking it had to have that kind of hierarchy, that it had to be somebody that was either a direct line manager or a boss or somebody like that. And many times I've been hired in organizations with really the expectation that I wouldn't have that, where I would have a manager, but I'm not going to have anybody that's, people generally tend to hire me and say, go figure it out, which can become frustrating. And you do look for those kind of outlets. And what I realized quickly is it was my perception of how I expected the mentorship relationship to work that slowed me down. And when I started looking for it and helping others, and when they got their own feet under them, they were able to then almost reflectively give me things based on kind of the DNA and culture I built around them. Then I found that mentorship from below or laterally because, hey, I went out and helped them. I helped them work through a problem. And then when the time needed, it came back to me. And I didn't feel like anything was owed or anything like that, but it became this very natural relationship where you create that symbiotic relationship. And it became really important for me to understand that. It took a while. I think it slowed me down, quite frankly, in building those relationships because I really expected that linear kind of hierarchy that doesn't need to be there.
Oh, absolutely. I think I have learned some of the most valuable things I've learned from peers or from people who have worked that are starting out in their careers and see things without some of the same filters that we've built up in our careers over time, or that haven't been in a particular role or vertical for as long or in the same way. Yeah, it's really important. One of the things you said, though, I guess sparked another question. When looking upward, one of the things I hear a lot of people struggle with when trying to identify mentors is the fear that going to somebody above them or somebody in a position of defined power or leadership in an organization would be seen as an attempt to try and get something down the road. Thoughts on how to make that a little more comfortable, to make people more comfortable approaching those, and when their intents really are genuine.
Yeah, I think people in general can be a little guarded when asking for help, and particularly when somebody that's viewed hierarchically in an organization as being a senior person that, either they don't have the time or, that there should be other layers in between that, whether it be other managers. So I think it's important for organizations to create that fostered, cliche to say open door relationship, but you really want to have that where people feel comfortable going and asking for help. And I think I've struggled with getting people to even do that with me, where they said, "Well, geez, I don't want to go bother you because you're the manager, the boss." I'm like, "No, that's literally the only reason I'm here. I'm here for you." And so I really had to kind of create that culture, but it was definitely, I saw it come from a lot of people that came from very rigid kind of organizations where they didn't feel that they can either feel comfortable speaking, frank to me. They felt that they also had to carry themselves, which I'm not saying like disrespectful, but they felt that, gosh, I don't want to be seen as talking out of turn either.
Candor isn't necessarily thought to be permitted in those discussions.
Yeah, and it's really hard. And a lot of the things that I look for is, let's say, other types of mentoring material, whether it be business books or other types of material, that I gravitate to things that have preached a lot of transparency and accountability from the top down. Not every organization really likes that.
Right.
Even though we all say we do, I don't always see it happening. So when I've really pushed it organizationally, even within my small teams, I've seen it create problems in an organization where they're like, we don't appreciate the fact that you've now fostered this ability where people can speak frank to you, come up with ideas, and just bring up things to you, ask for help, because that's not the way we wanted it. And I said, yeah, but by all measurable metrics, we've gotten XYZ done. And they're like, we don't like it. We like the outcome. We don't like how the ingredients that went into that. And I'm like,
Enlightenment is not
yeah.
allowed, Doug.
But that's what it is. They're like, if people would really like come from other offices and go, the way that your team is operating is foreign to me. People are almost talking over each other. It's like I grew up with a lot of families. Everybody would argue, and a lot of type A personalities. Like, you got to kind of fight it out a little bit, but then things would get done, and they were like, "That's amazing," and nobody felt hurt about it. I'm like, no, everybody can speak up, and if I'm wrong, I'll be the first one to admit it. But I kind of want that fostering that kind of level of communication. I've seen people grow, and then really the biggest thing I think about mentoring is seeing that people can stand on their own 2 feet and kind of get out of the nest a little bit. And when you see them operating on their own, and when they've gone through that kind of formula, that to me is rewarding, where I feel like, they own their own business, part of what they do. They see their own career progression. They feel confident. I guess that's the overwhelming thing, is when I see people I've mentored confident, that's a huge win for me.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you do a lot to promote that psychological safety for people to be able to speak up and feel comfortable that their ideas and values are being heard. Now, you might not always agree, but that they have an opportunity to be able to say what's on their mind. And maybe some of the things that are on your mind are like, whoo, that was an interesting moment, we're just going to move on from there. But that's an element that creates that creativity and solution finding, problem solving that it sounds like your teams are well known for.
They are, and it comes with a little bit of a double-edged sword too. Like I said, there's safety in that, but the way I look at it is, I'm going to give you a license to drive, but I'm not going to put that car on a fixed track. You know where the lines are on either side. There's trees and mailboxes and other drivers on the road. I'll definitely pull the wheel away from you if you're about to crash, but I'm going to let you kind of discover it on your own and figure out your momentum and pace. But it's up to you to drive that car. And with that, you're going to have to figure out a lot on your own. And so, often, people come to me with for, a quick answer, and it's usually me then locking my screen and then them going, oh no, it's not gonna be one of those Doug things. I'm like, yep, here you go. I'm not, you're gonna have to earn this, and make them think through the problem. And it's that, cliche to teach a person to fish thing. But once they've kind of gone through that, problem solving process enough times, they know better, that they've better done some research and said, hey, look, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. Here's what I've tried so far. Here's where I think are some of my options. Can you help me go through this, and really make them, again, have some kind of ownership of their own initiative.
So I want to jump back to your culture comment before, about operating in organizations in which that kind of an approach isn't necessarily appreciated. Many people are in those organizations and still want to grow. 2 parts. One, to what extent do you push back on the organizational culture and try and do it anyway? And to what end, in your experience? And then 2, if that's not going to, when it comes to that inevitable end, what is I guess, how do you still satiate the need for that growth, for that input, for that feedback, and not run afoul of the culture of the organization?
Yeah, it's tough, and I learned that a couple times the hard way, because I tend not to do things kind of half-stepped. I tend to maybe be a little overbearing, and that's to the way I operate. So when trying to initiate a lot of that cultural change and using things like first break all the rules and all the kind of was it the Gartner studies about personality tests, and trying to find what's the best fit for people in roles, and really kind of champion that idea, and making sure that it's a very employee first kind of mentality. Like, that's a big thing, is saying the employee's happy, the customer's going to be happy, everybody's happy, which again was a really hard thing to try to do. So I would say do it with kid gloves. Don't try to make radical changes, even though it might feel great. Just finding little wins, as we just talked about in security too, is like, you might have this big program goal, but you have to get the organization, the prime pump, or the pump primed in a certain way to get things going in that direction, so everybody can feel like it's worthwhile. I've gone as far as then maybe working with the HR people, say, hey, look, here's an idea I have, and maybe give them an idea to champion the cause. It's where it's not just coming from me and another one of Doug's, windmills he's chasing, but it's really somebody else can also have that enablement with inside the organization to champion it. And a lot of times I've seen that kind of come back, post leaving organizations where people said, you are 100% right. They're starting to implement this now, but it was sometimes in the direction and the tone that you delivered the request for it and wanted to push it through that slowed down that progress. So while people, even that were still with those organizations say, gosh, you were right. How does that feel? I go, well, it kind of sucks because I wanted to be there to be part of it. And I realized I was sometimes an inhibitor of my own dreams. Because I was trying to push something that they weren't ready for. And so it's really finding the timing and people internally that want to champion that culture where it's not seen so revolutionary.
It almost sounds like it aligns to more traditional organizational change management mindsets where you have to set the seed and let the seed grow. And it takes time to build an oak tree.
Yeah, definitely.
At the right time of year too.
Yeah, it's timing's everything.
Yeah. Interesting. So let's jump back to your first your first mentoring relationship. How did you go out and ask for help the first time?
Yeah,
it doesn't have to be names, but tell us the story.
Yeah. So a lot of it goes back to working with when Merrill Lynch was a big client. I mean, they were 80% of the business that I was doing a lot of work with, and so a lot of that work involved going on the road. So I would go in and operationally put in computer networks, computers, so I have to secure them at remote sites. So if the executives were having an offsite meeting, we'd have to go kind of drop in behind enemy lines and build this network. Very high stress environment, a lot of pressure. And I think I was more fortunate to find people that were willing to take me under their wing without necessarily me asking. They were very careful. I think they were good in the mentor side of it by kind of finding me and saying, hey, why don't you try this? Or I think you'll be good at this. They didn't overwhelm me or make me feel pressure. And it almost happened organically, even though I'm pretty sure they had some intent in that where they felt, hey, there's somebody he's doing a good job. He needs a little help without me asking and kind of guiding me along where I didn't even see it was happening until after the fact, which was awesome. And then
did you appreciate not knowing as it was going on, or would you have rather have known they had some conscious plans for you?
I think conscious plan. I mean, I'm happier that they had conscious plans and didn't tell me.
Okay. Yeah.
Almost becomes, when you're part of that experiment, it could skew the outcome. And I, took me a while, I would say for a long time to be able to feel comfortable asking for help. I mean, part of the problem of one coming out of going back to my parents in a very consulting relationship where they were always the ones that were looked at as the experts. Everybody always went to them to get help. We were never fostered in a way, as a family or even outside of that to ask for help. It was, you're the expert, so you need to figure it out. And that sets up a really hard thing for a lot of people that fall into those roles of even thinking of asking for help because you immediately feel like, I need to know everything. And so by somebody, kind of seeing that in me a little bit and then guiding me along so I didn't even know what was happening was great.
That's good. That's good. How about the flip side? The first time when you consciously realized you were helping somebody else, whether you realized or were doing it consciously or whether it just happened and you went, what did I just do?
Yeah, it was early on in that same kind of organization where I started trying to, really build a staff where then I had, a business model that was going and I had to bring in other people. And there was something that Dan, you and I were talking about earlier today was, there's a saying that somebody on my podcast, Chris Pogich, said really early on, and a lot of my podcast talks about security leadership and mentoring, but he said something that stuck to me, and this was the first podcast recording I ever did. He's like, you're not a leader until you build a leader that then builds another leader. And that idea of scalability of that kind of culture, and that was really great to me. So then I didn't necessarily feel indebted to having to, hey, now I need to bring somebody else in my organization that can do what I can do and then teach somebody else. But that became exciting. That idea of, wow, somebody kind of showed me the way. Now, if I can show that person and then show them, that's a really kind of cool thing. And I think a lot of it too is also fortunate. At the time I was taking a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which is different, I think, than a lot of martial arts, because you only have really kind of 5 levels, and there's the same kind of hierarchy of you have to kind of prove your worth, but everybody kind of helps each other in the gym and the dojo. So you know, even if you're at a low level belt, you're teaching other people things. So this idea of, okay, now that you learn something, you're going to be better at it when you teach somebody else.
Right.
And so I felt I kind of applied that in work. It's like, okay, I figured out this thing about this network and how I'm going to do it in this hotel ballroom where, again, where it's 2 o'clock in the morning and we need to have this whole network ready in 3 hours. How the hell did I do this? And it made me unpack my own, you know, success, so to speak, and then say, okay, if I break it down and teach this other person, I get a better understanding of how I got here. And then it became replicable. And then I had, instead of one project, going 6 projects concurrently. It's only because then I had to stop and figure out, how do I teach somebody to do what I do, and then replicate that, and then have them take that leadership. And again, that autonomy and confidence I wanted to see in them. So when I started getting some folks really being able to do that on their own, and the point that I think was really rewarding is when I just had to check in with them, because you always get that fear when you kind of let somebody go is, oh crap, is this working? And then, you know, no news is good news when you don't have the end client coming back to you and going, hey, what the hell's going on? And they're just like, no, everything's going great. And I'm almost kind of bored. I'm like, I'm not getting the adrenaline rush of putting out fires. Other people are now. I got to go find something new to chew on.
How do you, that's a good point, because I don't know about you, but I'm a little type A at times.
Right.
A lot type A at times. and you know, and that feeling when you release somebody and you say, go, we've given you the information, we've given you the knowledge, I think you're ready, go forth and do it, and letting them go, and you don't hear anything, and you want to ask. Do you go ask? Do you let them wait to come to you?
A little bit of both. I try to measure that system, but sometimes I would say I would ask to the point where I don't have to anymore when I get the right cadence. And a lot of this, it's how when I brought people onto the team, you know, I would test them too. I would give them their own kind of clients, and I'd say, you know, you need to manage this relationship, and particularly in incident response, that's tough. I mean, those are high pressure environments, a lot of late hours, propensity for burnout, which I'd always try to pull people back from, so they just, you know, stop feeding off of that dopamine hit all the time, you know, recognizing my faults in them and trying to pull them back. But say, hey, look, let's cut out early and go to happy hour. And they're like, no, I've got too much work to do. I'm like, I'm the boss saying, let's stop and go. And they're like, now, and they had that ownership and responsibility of it. I was like, that's awesome. Like, to me, that was really cool, where they're like, no, we're not hanging out tonight. Like, I have my things that I take pride in and ownership of. That's not getting interrupted right now. Even though it's for you and for the business, this is me. And they had that kind of self-ownership was really cool.
That's great. Yeah, it wasn't until I started teaching at the university level, started teaching courses, and started to try and put together the things I believed, the things I understood, that I got a really good sense of how people respond to those, and then having the benefit of being able to see them come back, you know, 2-3 years later, and start using my own words back to me, and not in that sarcastic, ironic way, but it's actually become part of them. And you go, wow, I guess one, you listened, two, it was something useful, and you know, it's actually quite a nice, you know, talking about the dopamine rush, that's a dopamine rush right there, to know that you had a part in helping somebody grow themselves and become successful as a result of it, even if it was just a small part of it.
Yeah, it was a couple companies ago. It was a joke. They started saying it's like the cult of Doug. You know, I started kind of getting this DNA into the team, and they would repeat things, and people were like, that's something Doug would say, and I was like, that's a good thing. And actually, one of my best analysts of all time said, yeah, Doug, you really would be a good cult leader. I go, thank you. He goes, I didn't necessarily mean that as a compliment, but I was like, that's kind of a nice thing. He's like, you have that ability to kind of get people, you know, excited about something, and everybody attacking this problem. I'm like, yeah, that to me is cool. Seeing that, you know, kind of swarm on a problem and seeing people just go ripping through it. And it's just that's incredibly rewarding.
Well, I'm glad the comet has now successfully passed us. So
yeah,
don't worry about that.
And I love how you bring kind of passion and purpose to your discussions, and then you find a way to let go and let people share in that in their own unique way. But you've set a framework to help them with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that again, it really goes back to the early stuff that, you know, the mentors I had that really said, look, we're not going to tell you how to do this. here's where we want you to go, but here are the boundaries. And you're going to have some stumbles on this. There's no expectation that you're not going to fall, but we expect you to get back up and keep moving.
So there's a big difference between coaching and mentoring, and and managing, even as a third tier. And as managers, we often have to come in and go, you need to do it that way. Yeah. But even then, coaching them through it is important. But there are going to be cases where you don't have direct authority, and so you want to walk up to somebody and give them some proactive advice to help them on their way. It isn't always necessarily well received. Any thoughts on ways to those that want to offer that, on how to broach that discussion from the beginning?
Yeah, a lot of this, when we talk about hacking and sales and all this, a lot of it comes down to the root of being good at social engineering, of just being able to kind of read somebody the right way. And I think it applies to this as well, as getting them, when you see them struggling with something or where you kind of need help, but getting them to talk about it. And so whether it's say, hey, let's go get a drink or let's go get lunch, without the perception of that's the road you're going to go down to, and then maybe plant some seeded questions along the way about, hey, how's things going with this project? And you'd be surprised. I mean, people will just tend to open up. Like, they know what their problems are and they just need that platform. So it becomes very therapeutic. In that sense, where I said, yeah, even there's times I should get a therapist rate with people because I know they're struggling with something. But if I can start teasing it out of them and not be so pointed, they know it's there. That thing, whatever's in them, they'll start to say, okay, well, have you thought about it this way? And never being, I think it's also important not to be critical. And this is something one of the mentors that I had back in this really kind of formative period of my consulting and career with the Merrill Lynch stuff. And this one particular mentor, so it was Lonnie Hamilton, really good guy. And he had said, don't tell somebody no, because we worked with the client together. He's like, don't tell them no. He'd say, that's a great idea. However, have you thought about trying it this way? And it was just this soft touch way of spinning it. And I finally start doing that with other people. Say, never tell them like, hey, that's stupid. Just say, that's really interesting. But what about if you looked at it this way? And just getting them to go, oh, wow, yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, as opposed to like, coming right at them with full force, where they feel immediately on the defensive. What's wrong? It becomes a negative connotation.
Yeah.
Right. You
Yeah,
don't want them to
absolutely.
entrench or anything like that, because when you say something negative about a thought, sometimes people just
Oh, they're going to dig in.
defend it till the death.
Yeah,
Exactly. Or this will resonate with you, Doug. I've started doing in after action reviews or lessons learned sessions after incidences, changing the question about what went wrong to what was most surprising.
yeah.
And I cannot believe the change in the types of responses you get, because what went wrong is you get people going, no, nothing, I couldn't possibly. Yeah. But when you talk about surprise, what was surprising, you get the same types of answers, but it's way easier to talk about those kinds of things. It is so much about the wording.
Oh, wording is so key, and that's, I think, benefit of coming up with consultants, communications consultants as parents is phrasing that. And that really, again, it's that social engineering aspect of like, where you want to get people to go, but it's how you say things in the right order kind of sets that cadence and tone.
So we should be suspect of everything you say to us.
Absolutely. I've told people that. See, I always say that a thief is going to steal your money. A scam artist is going to find a way for you to trick it over. I'm going to be a magician. You're going to hand me that $20 bills and keep asking me to make it disappear. You're part of the act when you're in the Doug Show. So yeah.
Spoken like a true billable hours person.
Exactly.
Excellent. So you and I were talking a little bit earlier on a slightly different topic. We were talking a little bit earlier about the state of, I guess, the state of readiness in the security field. And I think this equally applies in the compliance and ethics and risk spaces as well. But the state of readiness of people, we spend a lot of time talking about, we don't have people ready. We don't have the right people. We don't have enough people to do what we're doing. And I think it's up to us as leaders to continue to grow those people. But what do you think of that statement as we just don't have enough people?
There's probably still a decent amount of headcount shortage. But the but being the big caveat is I think it comes down to, are we getting the most out of the current investments? So if I'm hiring somebody and I expect them to work 40 to 50 hours a week, and I do, I try to set caps around that. I know there's diminishing returns, there's time arbitrage. I'm not going to get the same output of somebody at 9 p.m. as I got at 9 a.m. Just not going to
Right.
happen. So then it puts certain constraints around my business models that say, okay, well, am I getting the most out of them? For those times. And I don't mean that in a way of like abusive or anything like that, but really, are they growing? Am I getting the impact that I want and the best out of it? Measuring that, and then starting to try to fill in the gaps instead of the other way around and say, well, we need 4 full-time employees just to do this task. I'm like, well, why? And why are we doing that? Is that the right use of people? And then trying to find those people that have different types of skills around leadership and mentorship, say, well, can they then, again, with that idea of a leader building another leader who builds another leader, can they then take on more in the sense of scaling their results, teaching other people how to do things where it's not, removing things like repetitive tasks or wasteful tasks, where they start spotting that. And I think it really comes down to leadership within organizations to really kind of mentor and foster efficiencies. And that's really tough. And coming from somebody that worked in professional services, that was a really hard thing to do, because people say, well, then you're going to cut your nose to spite your face if we're not spending as much time on this problem. Like, that's not good for the client. The employees just doing repetitive tasks and really not learning anything. They're not growing. So I was like, we're just kind of hit this flat. So what if we put other types of constraints? And like one example I did was say like a pen testing engagement. I would say, we're going to only do for this size of these environments X number of dollars. And people are like, well, what if it goes over? What if they spend more time? I'm like, well, now I'm going to put it on the employee to say, I'm going to give you incentive that if you do this, if I say I expected this to be done in 50 hours of time and you get it done in 35, you're going to get credited for 15 hours in extra revenue that somehow equates to some downstream bonus or whatever it is. So they share into that process, where I then said, okay, there's the box that you have to work in, you figure it out. And really made them do it. And what became was, still this day, to a lot of the pen testers that I ran through this operation, we took something that got down from, we used to take 50 hours, I constrained them, or I was so we used to take like 75 hours, I constrained them at 50. They got down to that, and then they were eventually just shaving time off continually and taking pride in and saying, oh, I found a better way to do this. And then they would share with each other, hey, I found a new tool of efficiencies. And all of a sudden, is we were doing what would have taken 4 people and with 2 people and still being profitable. And it really made them take ownership in the business and see some of the business side of it, not just doing the technical execution, but also finding better ways to improve the process and having ownership. Because I can say, look, at the end of the year, if we're still profitable, you get shared of that, and incentivize them to, really enjoy the fact that they were doing something and constantly challenge themselves, but also have a financial reward. And we won, they won, and we were able to really kind of do it with half the head count. So I think there's examples like that exist all over the place, whether it be a SOC or whatever it is. And there's all these different things you can apply, but it really comes down to leadership, finding people that want to own their own kind of work life and find better ways to improve on it.
So, quick question for you, because I'm curious now.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people who listen in to MentorCore are considering transitioning into the field. They may be coming from other areas of compliance or risk or ethics, or might be moving from information security into more of an audit or compliance role. When you have people who are interested in making that type of a move, but they don't have experience in the exact role, how can people who are more seasoned in that, that role, or that kind of family of roles, help others to lead them through this when they've got some great core, maybe people skills, understanding, they have the education, but maybe not as much practical experience in the field that they're trying to transition into?
Yeah. To that, and I'd say some of the most effective employees that I had that have done cybersecurity, risk, or compliance as a second or third career.
Yeah.
And what the beauty about that is, training them is not just in the age that they were, but there was maturity that they had in business. Whereas if I take somebody fresh out of college, that maybe, in particular, we see this now, is a lot of folks that have gone to a 4-year undergraduate degree in computer science, they then go get a master's. So within 7 years of that, they come out really green in business. And there's also a lot of academic things that they've learned that may not apply in the field that day. So all of a sudden, I'm training somebody in how to be a business person, how to be a human. A lot of times, these are people that are incredibly bright, but just trying to focus them and interact with other people and be part of that team. And then teach them technical skills. So it becomes really hard, whereas opposed to somebody that's coming in a second or third career, then has managerial experience, has people communication skills, possibly writing skills and report writing skills. That's so valuable to me, that I can immediately kind of foster them in the technical stuff, or pair them with folks that might be highly technical that are junior in their other areas, and it becomes this area within that mentor relationship happens with them. And again, I can even step back out and I can, kind of softly guide them in the right directions, but they can really work with each other, and I can see that relationship kind of grow, which is great. And that again adds to that scalability. So, as people enter the field, there's no shortage of need when it comes to the business and communication skills, understanding risk. If you have some sense of that, you have value and you can teach other people. And that's, again, this whole idea of giving to get, is that don't think that just because you're new to the technology part of it, that there's not other things that you've done in life that can be incredibly valuable. And even on the technical stuff, find things that are out there that interest you. Everybody has something that their brain's going to connect on technically, and they might see a new problem or see an existing problem that hasn't been solved yet. I always tell them, go chew on that bone, like go attack that, and then write up a blog piece about it, post it on LinkedIn, do something that you're kind of just putting out there. You're going to learn a ton. You're going to get a lot of feedback. You're going to build your network, and you're going to demonstrate your value to other peers within the, whether it be in your organization or the community, that you're going to, and I would say most likely, obviously, when people that do this, then continue to give, and they realize they get more back, and they build their network, and that creates more opportunity.
And you bring up a point that I think is really important. As these fields become more integrated with the businesses around us, whereas security used to often just be, propeller heads in the back room, back office, cranking on
good old days, right?
Staring at logs all day. Now it's seen in many cases as a key part of the business itself. So the understanding of the business, not just of business, but of the business that you're in, of the industry that you're in, the market, the customers. To what extent is it important or necessary for somebody growing within an organization to take time out of their day to go figure that out? And does that happen in the job? Does that happen on the side of the job? Where have you seen the best experiences?
I would say mostly on the job, although I've gotten people thinking more about that. I would hopefully find outside with folks I work with that are still active. As an example of that, one of the junior pen testers I had wrote me a message recently. He's like, I really appreciate the fact that you spent an inordinate amount of time teaching me or talking to me about business risk, and not in a way that was ever, at least I hoped it, because it was never my intent to be like a put down or egotistical, but say, well, look, if we're going to go attack this organization, how do they work? Like, what does this business do? Understand it. And he's like, I just want to attack. I just want to hack. I was like, all right, but the why you're doing it's kind of important. It puts into context. And I've made him go through this over and over again. Every time we get a new client, what does this business do? I don't know. I was like, wrong answer. Go Google it. Find out. Give me a use case of how you're going to, as we do our pre-planning to do this assessment, like what areas of this business should we care about? What do they do? Like, how do they make money? What are those critical systems that support that business function, and make them think through the business side over and over again. So eventually, recently within this last year, so this goes back to starting with him in 2014, so 6 years ago, and recently he's, grown up in an organization that he's at now. And so I really appreciate the fact that he taught me that, because my manager said, nobody else is on the teams talking in those types of terms. And the fact that you're bringing up is really important, and you're teaching others, to think that way. And it became that kind of replicable thing. So I think it'd be really important to continue to do that. And I think what's important about doing it on the job is I had specific use cases. If I told them, hey, just go read a book on business risk management, nobody's going to do that. But if I sit there and talk to them about critical systems in a business, well, why is it critical? Well, they need it for this. Okay, well, why? And just keep asking why. Like my 9-year-old. Well, why, Daddy? Why? Keep asking them until they kind of extrapolate and say, all right, maybe that's not the key system. and really getting people to focus on the right, the right kind of things within the environment. And it can happen more organically, I think, that way. If you force on a case by case business, people thinking through the business.
Excellent. I guess, and similarly, offensive and defensive is a little more security than it is mentoring. But I think it's also what we teach people and how to look at things from 360 degrees. There's this pervasive thought that if you're going to do pen testing, let's say, that you come at it aggressively about the offensive side versus understanding how it's being defended against. The same thing could be said in the compliance realm. If I'm going to take a particular tact, what are the counters to it? I guess tell me a little bit about how do you share that 360 degree, getting people to look at things from multiple perspectives. And because I don't get the feeling it's very innate in most people to automatically look at things from all the way around.
I don't know if it's necessarily not innate. I think it's part of the career paths and organizationally how we've set things up. Unfortunately, a lot of that comes from IT being very IT. Eventually you understand some basics, and going back to my days in the 90s of getting your MCSE, you had your kind of core stuff of understanding Active Directory, Windows environment, and networking, and then you'd fork off to different things. You'd have database engineers and support. Like everybody would kind of find their own path, and you wouldn't necessarily kind of cross train because then that became that department, and infrastructure guys would be the infrastructure guys. It doesn't exist in my book in cybersecurity as an effective way, but we somehow replicated that along the way, where we say, okay, well, there's these different paths, and they became these siloed departments. And then within consulting, I saw a big part of that amplified by then we had, well, that's the pen testing department, and they get revenue recognition and compensated all based on that business. And so any distraction from that's going to hurt their careers. And same thing with the incident response people, or the e-discovery people, or the risk people. And I go, well, isn't this just all data and business risk data that we're concerned? Well, no. Well, yeah, but we have to get more specific. I'm like, no, we don't. Like, if a customer comes to me and says we have a problem, they're not breaking it down in their mind of, oh, I think the way to tackle this is with incident response versus pen testing. What do you think? That never happens. Like, nobody from the receiving end is looking at it that way. So I always try to build that cross training with my teams. And so literally I would have a pen tester sit on one side of the table, blue team on the other, and I make them duke it out every, because they would always have to share ideas and then maybe step around the table and say, hey, have you seen this from a forensic artifact perspective? And then, they would understand, for example, the pen testers might not realize that there's a Metasploit thing that they're doing, or reverse shells that are leaving forensic tracks. And they'd be like, oh, wow, they'd find interest in that because, oh, wow, I didn't know what I was doing was leaving a footprint. And the blue team would be like, oh, that is, yeah, look, this is cool. And then they would say, well, here's the new type of exploits we're working on. And then they would hear about it. So it became more communal that way. And then both sides got to see it, but then they would, go back to where they really like to live. But it's good, I think, to get people out and cross training and looking at different things. And I think we're definitely not doing enough in compliance and risk, particularly now with data privacy being such a big thing, because, again, the impact to the business when you have a data breach can mean a lot of different things, depending on the type of data. And when we're looking at the new situation, just keep it topical, Garmin, that could have a lot of impact across a lot of different things. And I think it's important then to sit there and talk with your security software development lifecycle. Again, why are you taking in this data? How is it being structured in a way? And here's how the attackers would go after it. And then talk to your defenders and say, well, look, the defenders are going to have to do this as part of our incident response plan. Maybe we don't have all that data, and really just get everybody talking as part of the same team about the business and the risks that the data presents.
Yeah, I think to your point, compliance and risk continues to be connected, right? None of the attackers are like, well, we're only going to do this information security attack and we're not going to,
Yeah, the striations are only in our own minds.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think to your point, right, we all need to cross-pollinate and understand a little bit more about how these different roles play in the broad, big picture of the business.
And whereas these have been worlds where things you're working on from a legal perspective may have been, you tended to keep them quiet and not to share the kind of risks that were out there. Same in the security, in IR and other places. You talk about you keep them quiet because you don't want to share that. You're not inclined necessarily, or haven't been encouraged over time to share them. But across these fields, the more we're sharing information with each other, the better picture of the business impacts and the understanding of what's going on across the institution or the organization, helps us be better, all be better at what we're doing.
Yeah, I think the concept of sharing it's got this very big exponential benefit across a lot of people. I learn more, the business learns more. And if you think you're disclosing something that, oh gosh, an attacker is going to find out about it, they already know about it. Like if you have to assume that if you've already figured out something somebody else has and has shared it in ways that are being used against an organization. So the more information sharing you do, quite frankly, the better. And that's the only way to really grow. And it's unfortunate. I still think a lot of people want to say, well, this is my idea, and I don't want to, until I can have a chance to disclose it. And it's tough too at times. I mean, there's information disclosure can have a negative effect too. Early on in investigations, you don't want to put out too much because attackers still could be listening. You might not know the full thing, and last thing you want to do is then maybe, if you have an organization that has a potential data breach, is then having a lawsuit filed against them too early. To use COVID as maybe not a perfect one-to-one example, but there's, as you're figuring out things, a lot of information comes out at rapid pace, and then you have to step back over a 6-month period instead of a 6-day period and say, okay, what still matters? So there's definitely a balance in information sharing, but I still think it's critical if done the right way and in a responsible way that's going to grow individuals and organizations.
Yeah, totally. Well, we're coming up near the end of our time. We didn't seem to have a problem filling it.
We were worried for a second there.
What's that?
Yeah, we were worried for all 2 seconds there. So.
Yeah, it passed quickly. But I'll ask you one of the questions we ask everybody who comes on to join one of our events is to talk about the most valuable thing that you've learned from a mentor.
Sure. Again, working and we talk about this kind of dopamine rush of being attracted for whatever reason to these high pressure environments, the adrenaline rush of dealing with an incident response, or like I said, back in the Merrill Lynch days of, hey, it's 1 a.m., you have this room, you have to get it fully set up with the network, basically impossible task because nothing can fail. Love that high pressure environment. But there's a curve, right? There's a certain point where you lose focus and you start getting burnt out or overworked, or just, you become reactive instead of responsive, which is always the worst thing. And I had one of the mentors that, was freaking out about something. This one guy, he said, Doug, we're not curing cancer. We're not delivering babies. Put it into perspective of what we're doing now. It's important, but it's not the end of the world. Take a breath, regroup, and refocus. And that was something that I continue to use to this day to tell people. And it was funny to hear people that have been on my team that I've seen growing up as managers. Then I've always that sad thing of letting them go off on their own, and you hear them working in another room without you, but then hear things like, well, as Doug would always say, we're not curing cancer, delivering it. I was like, okay, it's resonating, and it's kind of has that scalability, and it was really cool. But I think that was really important because it is really easy to lose focus on all of this and just get sucked into the moment.
Unfortunately, though, in my time working in pharma, which was 10 years of my career, we were cancer, and there were people.
Our cases, look,
did it wrong. People did die, and people could die, and it was just a very different set of pressure. But that takes it from being dopamine to being just the weight, absolute weight on shoulders. It's a very different thing. So I said one more question. All the things we've talked about are work-related growth. Sure. And giving back to our offices, to our business, to our work colleagues. Giving to our communities, though, also extends beyond that, and can help us grow in other ways. Do you have any, I guess, advice on how to get engaged in your own community, in your own locality? Maybe it's in the security community as a whole.
The advice I have overarching is just do it. It's incredibly rewarding. In a lot of what we do, particularly in professional services or technology, tends to be financially rewarding, but at times it cannot be spiritually rewarding. Again, if you're doing incident response work, it gets burnt out. It's like operating in an emergency room where you're just seeing patients die after time and just coming in, you're patching up, throwing them out the door. You want to find those things to kind of help give back. And so I was very actively involved with an organization in New York City called Her Justice. I was on the junior board there. And again, I think it was a lot of other type A's, but it helped kind of feed that fuel a little bit for me, both altruistically, but also professionally. I got to network more, but it was one of those things where we took a one of our annual fundraisers that went from kind of a loss leader type of thing. It was like a marketing thing where we were down a couple $1,000s a year to where I got it to close to $250,000 in net gains for the organization in several
Wow.
years. But it was like, that was really cool. But I got to work with people. But the metrics of that, for every dollar that was raised within that organization, provided much needed legal services to women and immigrants in New York City. Like usually about $1, for every dollar gained was $6. So huge impact. So it was really cool seeing that. It was incredibly rewarding and so much more at times than dealing with the day in and day out. I found a very kind of existential kind of growth of that, of being able to say, wow, I'm impacting my community in a very positive way, and seeing people get help that they needed in ways that I couldn't just do if I just did one thing. But yeah, I'm actively always looking for new things to do in that. I think it's incredibly important, and it helps build your individual brand. And likely, I mean, that was a big thing, why I joined Splunk as it is. I was like, well, what do I have to do? They're like, keep doing what you're doing, like champion causes, go out there. Like, we want to see you contributing positively to the world wearing our jersey. But a lot of it's on you. And I think the more that people take that mindset of like, it has a little bit of a salesy aspect to it, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, just giving back and, kind of being proud of it is incredibly important, I think, mentally more than anything else.
Giving without the intent of getting, but you might
Yeah.
get something, and you might just get something out of it anyway.
Yeah, and it's a lot of it is you just have to release the outcome. There's something called the fourfold way, and that's the fourth step is, it's kind of go through this acceptance steps, but listen, do things without, expecting an outcome. And I think if you do that, when you give, it does. Like, it's like you'll get something back, even though you're not looking for it, in ways you don't always look for it. And then I think this goes back to the idea of this mentoring is, not always looking for this very prescribed outcome, knowing that you're going to just go in with an open mind and learn about things and be open to learning these new things. It then becomes amazing, in the sense that when you interact with people and you give and you learn more, to me, that's the most exciting parts of my day, is just interacting with people and learning different things.
Well, as a lawyer, thank you for doing all the work that you did with her justice, because those are very important causes, and helping lawyers to be able to do the work that they do, and actually being able to support, an organization like that to move from what was a loss leader to a huge revenue item for the benefit of other people is absolutely incredible.
Oh yeah, it was amazing, and you got to meet a ton of great people. But yeah, as you said, it's just hearing stories of um, people. I think there's just so much out there when you look at people that either don't have the financial means or the connections, but to be aligned with those resources, and whenever you can find opportunities to kind of help bridge that, I think is amazing.
Yeah, I think your comment about the connections, maybe that's a whole other discussion we can have another day on this another event, is the value of
Encore.
connections. But where can people find you, Doug?
Yeah, the easiest place. I'm definitely on LinkedIn. You can't miss me there, Douglas Brush. And then cybersecurityinterviews.com is my website with the podcast and links to other areas of social media to find me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And thanks to all who joined us live and who will watch this on the replay.
My pleasure.